Hi guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of the In the Hub podcast, brought to you by Playbox Technology UK. Today, I'm speaking to Gareth Capon, CEO at Gravio. Gareth's career has seen him take on positions at Accenture, BT, Sony and Sky, leading him to his current position at Gravio, industry leaders in the cloud video production space. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Right, so good morning and welcome to the In the Hub podcast today. Gareth, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Thanks, Neil. Very good to be here. Thank you.
No, it's good to hear, and thank you for obviously taking the time out this morning to come and speak to us about some pretty interesting topics, actually, and things that I've wanted to cover for a little while now. And that's obviously to do with live production and that being based out in the cloud and things like that. So Gareth, before we do kind of get into the nitty gritty of cloud-based live production and things like that, how did you personally get your start within the broadcasting industry? Where did it all begin for you?
I didn't really start within the broadcast industry at all, to be honest. When I started out my career as a strategy consultant, 20 odd years ago, working in sort of media and technology with media and technology companies, and actually went out on my own to sort of launch a smaller strategy consultancy firm focused on that sector because I was specifically interested in sort of media and technology, and at that time decided to launch my first startup, which was like a social networking and music streaming distribution business all on mobile right back in 2005. And it was a really fun business. We had we signed up hundreds of thousands of bands and users, but the technology for video and streaming was horrendous. The iPhone hadn't launched. You could barely get a video out on a mobile phone. But I was always fascinated by, I suppose, the trends in media consumption, just trends in human behavior ultimately. And that sort of led us to build that business, which was, it wasn't a particularly successful company, but it was a really fun project. It taught me a lot about media, about video, and about mobile in particular. And I think that from that point onwards, I was always really interested in the intersection of consumer behavior and media and what that meant for industry, and obviously video being a really cool part of that. So, my career went on. I worked at Sony Music. I obviously worked at Sky. We're actually running the mobile apps there, and that was probably the precursor to coming to Gravio. So I think it's I think that the most interesting question is really what does the broadcasting industry quote unquote really mean now? What does it mean as you look forward for the next 5 to 10 years? And I think that's probably the core of what we're doing here at Gravio, and the bit that really excites me about looking forward.
Yeah, and it's every time I write that question out in preparation for these podcasts, it's every day the kind of definition of the broadcasting industry is becoming a lot more vague, isn't it? A lot more kind of general. Anyone can really be a broadcaster these days with some of the technologies and tools that we've got. And I truly find that really exciting, to be honest. I think that's the way it should go. You touched on it a little bit there, Gareth, already, but what is it about the kind of broadcasting industry that really keeps you hooked, if you had to boil it down into one thing?
I think you just touched on it. It's about content creation. The most exciting part of this space is that it's focused on people who are creating things that other people want to watch. And if you think if one of our most valuable assets that we have is our time, and we're giving up our time to spend that on content, watching, sharing, talking about something, I think it's hugely important, and it brings such an amount of joy and passion to lots of people's lives. Everything from whether it's sport or music or fitness or any news, whatever it may be, any form of content. If people are giving up their time, it means that they enjoy it and they want to watch it. And I think what we've seen over the course of the last decade, as you touched on a moment ago, is this huge proliferation of what a content creator is, who can do it. It's been really democratized in terms of access, and I think that's fantastic. It means that anyone with a great story to tell or some creative ideas now actually can go out and create a platform, get an audience, and maybe even make a career out of creating content, which I think was very a much more challenging thing to do outside of the traditional media industry a decade or more ago.
Definitely. No, I couldn't have said it better myself. And Gareth, for anyone who doesn't already know, could you just run us through some of the background on Gravio as a company?
Sure, happy to. I mean, we launched Gravio about 7 years ago. When we launched, we were a live clipping business, and that's still one of our most popular products. Helping anyone with content that's generally live. It can be on-demand content as well, but generally live content, to get that out in short form version across predominantly social media platforms, maybe websites, apps in real time. So whether it's goals from the Champions League from BT Sport, or helping UFC share elements of pre and post fight or their fights, whatever it may be, on news clips, but really getting that content from an event or a more traditional media channel or a broadcast channel into, most of the time, into social feeds in front of users on social platforms in real time. That's where the business started, and we built out lots of tools for optimize that content, for vertical formats and square and adding graphics and all the things you'd expect to see in your social media feeds. We've added editing tools too, as you start to look at sort of compilations of clips in those environments. But the more recent development over the last sort of 18 to 24 months was actually building out a production platform for creating live TV or live events, live video in the cloud. And that is a real focus of the business from a development standpoint right now. Looking at all of the elements of a traditional control room or traditional production environment and seeing how much of that we can rebuild in a browser, and really looking, we talked earlier about broadcast. If we think about broadcast as focused on quality and like the professional level of content production and output, that's really where we're focused. How can we take those really professional tools and that really high quality polished output and create that in an environment which we can make much simpler to use, incredibly flexible and scalable in the way that it's built, but accessible to everyone, because you just need a laptop and internet connection, not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of hardware.
Brilliant stuff, Gareth. And I did want to touch on this, and it's this idea of obviously cloud technology for live production, and just how much of a game changer that has been for so many broadcasters and companies across the globe. If you kind of had to boil it down into some core benefits for broadcasters, both big and small, what kind of benefits can those broadcasters expect from cloud-based live production?
There's a whole range of things, really, and it depends on I suppose the scale of investment in the technology, what it is that people are trying to do, and actually how much of the more sort of traditional production services infrastructure are available to the people creating the content. That all has an impact. So we do a whole range of things in cloud production, and the vision is pretty significant and broad in terms of what we're going to build out over the course of the next year or two. But if you look at what's being done today, you could probably break it down into 3 or 4 core areas. One is people doing sort of cloud, sort of unique cloud productions, like a digital production, so something which is created maybe entirely in Gravio, bringing in guests from various locations around the world, adding graphics, maybe bringing in social media content, feedback from fans, and creating a show which might go out on YouTube Live or on Facebook or to a website, maybe all of those platforms at the same time. But it's a show that can look really high quality, but actually the production input and the infrastructure required and the people required is really lightweight and much more flexible than a traditional setup. We do a really interesting show with UFC that's sort of a pre-fight show, which is shot partly on mobile phones, partly on sort of remote cameras. We replicate their broadcast graphics, and it looks really high quality, but the production setup is really lightweight, compared to their big OB trucks and other things they'd be bringing to their big events. So that's one area. I think there's another area which is sort of augmenting or extending, localizing traditional production. So we do a lot of this might be in sport, whether it's things like remote commentary or creating different graphics packages for a host broadcast output, or even things like cropping a 16:9 video feed in vertical format because you want to stream it on TikTok, whatever it might be. There's lots of things you can do in the cloud that sort of sit alongside a traditional production, and we definitely don't see Gravio needing to be exclusive all the time. In many cases, it's not. We're very commonly used in combination with other production technologies, and of course you can add on the clipping, the highlights editing, Gravio as part of that. And then I think the last piece then is starting to look at that more sort of progressive, disruptive area. It says, well, where can you start to replace, elements of traditional production? Where can you reduce costs? Where can you increase flexibility? Where can you add scale and access in a way that wouldn't be possible if you have to have everyone at a venue or in a studio or in a truck, wherever it may be? And there's obviously components of that which still need to be built on our side, and we release updates to the product every week to do that. But also it has some really quite significant benefits, in terms of the environmental sustainability, in terms of the cost model for production, because you can pay for exactly what you need and what you use rather than having to buy lots of capacity, and simple things like people not having to get on a plane or go to a studio. That has impacts on who can do the production and where they can be and what they can work on. So I think all of these things are really important. We just, if we talked earlier about broadcast, we're going back to that topic. The expectations of quality, reliability of the service are really high in the broadcast environment, and for good reason. TV works and it doesn't go down very often, and it looks great. And it's incumbent on us to build out, the tools and the scale to be able to deliver that level of experience. And we're pretty confident about that. We've done shows on TV with Fox in Mexico. We did some work with EA last year on ESPN for one of their big FIFA tournaments, so that we know that we have the capability to deliver it to every screen. And that's really the vision. Build out a set of production technologies that can do everything from an 80-inch OLED TV in your living room down to a vertical video live on TikTok. If we can do all of those things in a really easy to use, really scalable way, then we've got the opportunity to take advantage of all of this new live content coming out. Because I think that's the other part of this discussion. It's not just about, well, what can you do in sport or news or traditional media? Well, what about live shopping? What about corporate events? What about all the event section in general, which is sort of a mix of virtual and hybrid right now? All of these Zoom communications, as we talked about earlier. Live video is actually a much bigger category than people necessarily realize, because consumers at home necessarily aren't thinking that when they jump on a FaceTime call, with their parents or their grandparents, essentially that's a live video experience. You might not be looking for graphics and production and camera switching, but essentially you're getting a live video experience in the cloud. So I think that the category itself is going to increase a lot, and I think that particularly as we look at the sort of the next generation of of YouTubers, on TikTok, on these social media stars, I think live's going to become an increasingly important category, because it is so unique, and because you can't replicate the serendipity of a live experience. So I really firmly believe that this category is going to grow. This isn't just about looking at how we support traditional media. It's also saying, how do we support the new media, the new formats that emerge, and ultimately the new platforms that emerge too. Because as we've seen with the growth in Twitch, in TikTok, we're not finished in what new platforms look like. So we haven't even touched on AR and Oculus and the metaverse and all these other popular topics that are around right now, that we're just beginning to dip our toes into. So I think we're very, very early in the development of this industry.
Yeah, no, I could have a whole entire kind of podcast series talking about just the potential for new technologies, like you're saying, with VR and things like that, and AR. That is something that I constantly find myself amazed about. It's finding out about this new potential for video to work its way into pretty much every facet of our lives, and there's just new stuff coming in every day, isn't there? It's really exciting stuff. And then Gareth, I think you guys are really well placed to answer this question, and it's just, how are today's consumers influencing the technology choices that broadcasters are making?
I think a lot of it does come down to time, as we talked about, time and attention. What's changed in a world where everyone or almost everyone is connected all the time, is that access to content, to video, to communications is non-stop, and therefore the amount of choice that you have is almost limitless. And I think that has a really significant impact on the type of content that's going to be made available to consumers, how it's made available, which platforms that it's on. Is it authentic, and does it fit well on that platform? Does it meet the expectations of the audience when they're there? There's a very big difference in shooting a show for TikTok than there is for shooting it for Sky Sports, or for BBC One, or for NBC, whatever it might be. So I think that's the first question, is really understanding the characteristics of the platform and audience, and making sure your content fits well in that environment. And then the second question is making sure that you create both a content experience and a business model which is attractive to consumers, because they have choices. And I think that's been the big change in streaming. We've long been proponent of a move from more traditional, particularly in the sort of TV video industry, more traditional forms of broadcasting, to streaming all of its forms, because it gives choice. It gives a level of options and choice to consumers, and most importantly, that's supported by a flexible, lower price point, lower cost business model, which also gives more access to people. So I actually think that we may see a slight reversion in some areas towards more free services being available. Actually, I think we've seen this maybe with Peacock in the US as a good example. So we're seeing this move saying that there needs to be a breadth of content available. We need it to be high quality in many cases, and you see actually over time, platforms tend to move towards quality. They start off as really, as low quality and then increasingly improve, and that's everything from Zoom calls to to videos on Facebook, and within that, it means that people are looking obviously for the tools to be able to help produce that content, but also really thinking about what the business model is to support it. So give that flexibility of access and make sure that people get the choice. They get the choice of content they want to consume, but also maybe at a price point that they think is reasonable. And I think we're seeing a bit of that reordering of the industry on that basis now. Obviously Disney made a big strong move with regards to Disney Plus, and I think that will continue. And I think that's going to be the big shakeup at the top end of the industry. But then you've got all this really interesting stuff happening at the bottom too. These creators on TikTok or Snap or YouTube who are out, have business models which are not, they're free to wear on. They're either paid by as a creator or as for tips or by advertising. And so this whole industry of a completely different content creation model, but also a distribution model too. So for us as a business, we see opportunities in both those sectors. We're definitely more focused on the higher end and the focus on what would be considered more traditional, like professional broadcasting. But actually, I expect that sort of second tier to over time start to increase and move towards the more sort of professional tier, as it were, because people are going to see the opportunities that they want to stand out and they want to differentiate their experience. You sort of see it already on Twitch. The top Twitch creators have a relatively professional setup and experience. I think we're going to see that in lots of other places.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's as we've been talking now that I realise just how much, obviously, social media clips that I consume, and just in general, more kind of short form content. So I will choose YouTube videos over sitting down and watching an hour-long drama on traditional TV. I'm not really sure what that says about me, but do you think that it's kind of getting harder to keep the attention of audiences with this long form content nowadays?
It's hard to say though. You only have to look at the most popular sporting events particularly on free-to-air television, whether it's the World Cup, the Euros during the summer, and actually, certainly if you look at we're seeing in the UK, you look at England's good performance in the Euros, and they had half the country watching the final live at the same time, maybe more than half the country. So there are definitely live, long-form experiences to still have the opportunity to aggregate big audiences, and I don't think that's going to change. I think that to your earlier point about short form, because I do think it's really important. I think it's particularly important, obviously, for things that are happening live that are driven by conversation, because we're all connected now. The information is going to find us. If something is happening live, and whether it's a big news event or sport or music, the reality is that conversation is going to be happening. And when that conversation is happening, people are going to look for content, and they may not always be able to watch it live or want to watch it live. Therefore, the next best thing is getting access to that content in real time as a short form piece of content. You've then got the other discussion you had. Well, there's other platforms like YouTube, which almost have a limitless supply of content. And again, the viewing experience has been traditionally short form, but given that one of YouTube's fastest growing platforms is the TV platform or connected TV platforms, then maybe that changes. Maybe YouTube's average viewing time has gone up over time. And then you've got you've got a platform like Twitch, which breaks the model entirely. It's a live platform with viewing times that they talk about often an average of 2 hours or more. People watching big events or streams. So I don't know. I don't necessarily know whether it's saying that people just want to watch things which are shorter form. I think it's that people have choice and there is more context to it, and you need to and people are making choices based on their own personal desires and what the sort of the aggregate experience of their friends is in many ways. So my view, or our view certainly within the company, is that you need to make sure your content is available in as many places as possible. You need to win that war for attention, and you need to give people choice. And it shouldn't, and regardless almost of the investment in the content, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way that a fan will want to consume it. I tell this anecdote of my son, which I think was a fascinating insight into an 8-year-old's view of media. When one day he sat down in front of the TV on a Sunday morning watching the rerun on live TV of Match of the Day, and it was like sort of 7:30 on a Sunday morning on BBC Two. And he called through to me and he said, Dad, the TV's not working. Oh, what do you mean the TV's not working? You're watching it. He said, no, the TV's not working. I can't fast forward the talking. And so he wanted to watch the highlights, he wanted to watch the clips, and in a world where everything is connected, he just didn't understand that he didn't have control of the media. And I think that experience is not, it's just sort of saying, one, he doesn't really understand what live TV is, certainly not if it's not a live event of some sort. But more importantly, this idea of control. And I think that's when we think about consumer behavior and technology, that's really what it's coming down to. That there is a generation of consumers growing up who will expect a level of control over their media, and that's going to dictate a lot of what happens with regards to platforms and content in the future.
God. Oh, that was really funny. I just thought, I talked about me consuming the short form content, but often I don't think twice about sticking a Twitch stream on and that running for 4 hours in the background. So I think it's very much not a one size fits all thing for me in particular. I imagine it's the same for everyone. They want whatever content they're feeling at that time, and there's just an abundance of places to get it nowadays. So it's completely agree. It's important to get as much as your content out there in as many different ways as possible. And then Gareth, I wanted to touch on advertising as well, because I'm always kind of interested in this and how advertising is almost shaping with technology. And just kind of open-ended question: do you think that the future of advertising is hyper-targeted? Do you think that there's kind of a limit to how much data audiences will feel comfortable with companies holding against them? Do you think we've kind of hit that limit yet, or do you think there's still some way to go?
A fair bit to unpack there in that question. I think that, well, if you start with the hyper-targeted question at the start, and that's was always seen as the holy grail of advertising. But actually, I think in many cases, when you look at certain types of brand advertising experiences, hyper-targeting isn't necessarily valuable. There's a lot of FMCG brands that whether you're selling toothpaste or cars, even to an extent, that where actually the brand advertising is really, really important, and therefore hitting a really big mass market is hugely important. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that targeted. It's actually about the reach and making sure that your brand is front and center in the mind of consumers. And TV obviously over time has been a brilliant platform for that. So I don't think it fits for every content experience. On the flip side, the success of platforms like Facebook and Instagram in particular for creating these very targeted ad experiences in context, in a social feed when you're browsing, and whether that's linked to to app installs for games or for shopping, obviously as we're seeing growing on Snap and Instagram. These have been hugely successful, particularly for more local advertisers. If you're a coffee shop in Brooklyn or in Southwest London, actually, if you can advertise on a social platform to a local audience who is local to you, that's hugely valuable, because if you're a Brooklyn coffee shop and you're advertising in San Francisco, it's not hugely helpful to you in terms of audience. So I think that you've got to look at those two things. They're both important. I think that TV, obviously, traditionally it's been impossible to do really targeted advertising because there was no two-way connection with that audience. That's obviously changing with streaming, and I do expect to see more levels of targeting to emerge and more targeted advertising on those platforms. Yeah. But the industry's obviously suffered, as we know, from some challenging issues around data, as you mentioned, and also the user experience. The idea of being followed around on the internet with a banner ad of the e-commerce store that you just visited, trying to sell you the trainers that you've already bought. It's not necessarily a great experience. So I think some of those things have to improve too. But I think with regards to data, I mean, it's a difficult question. There are services out there where we exchange our data as consumers, and in exchange we get free or discounted services, and that's the trade that we've been making for quite a long time with regards to social platforms and many others. I think that there is definitely an understanding now that there is value to that data. There is more legislation around to give people greater control of what data there is. But on the flip side, if you go onto Netflix and you start to get recommended movies and TV shows that you want to watch, because essentially you're sharing your consumption data with Netflix, you get a better experience. So there is a trade-off where actually sharing data isn't necessarily a bad thing. If your local football club or basketball team starts to give you a more targeted experience as a fan, or better offers, or a VIP experience because you're loyal, because they're using your data in an effective way, is that a bad use of data, or is that a really effective use for consumers? So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to the data question, but I do believe that that there are much greater opportunities to use data in a much more insightful and impactful way. And I think this, personalization has been a big topic in the industry for a long time. I think the platforms that are doing well actually are things like the YouTube and the social platforms. They're not really seen as personalization engines, but that's essentially what they are for media. Yeah, there can be some downsides to that, as we all know, some of the political challenges the last few years. But essentially, that they are great examples of actually using data in a really effective way to drive a personal experience, which drives engagement. And I think that there are lots. I think we'll see much more of that in more traditional media as people start to understand viewing behavior, what people are interested in. You can start to create an experience which is much more personal. But I don't think it's an easy topic, and I don't think it's something that is solved, with a 3-month integration project and then you sort of move TV to being this personalized TV experience. I think it is a lot more complicated than that. And going back to the earlier point of our discussion, there are also these certain experiences where you can actually bring hundreds, if not thousands or millions of people together for a shared content experience, for something that's is not personal at all. It's about saying, hey, look, we want to get together to watch the World Cup final or the presidential inauguration or whatever it may be. And I think those things are also hugely important.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. And thank you for navigating that question as well, Gareth. I'm aware it was a little bit convoluted. I just had all these kind of ideas in my head. I just stuck it on the paper. I was like, I need to ask Gareth about this. And then, Gareth, this is a question we ask at the end of every podcast, and some guests find it a little bit harder than others, but I usually encourage them not to overthink it and basically just say the first thing that comes to their head. And that's just, if you had to sum it up in one word, what can we expect for the future of the broadcasting industry?
Change. I mean, that is the one word answer. We're in probably the most prolific era of change in the media industry of the last 10 or 20 years, whether it's what's happening in content creation, with CGI and Unity and the Unreal engines and all of the sort of the computer vision that's happening in content creation, whether production, that we were moving production away from heavy investment, fixed infrastructure to much more flexible, cloud-based tools that can create different types of content in different places, democratize access. And also on the distribution side, we're moving towards an all connected sort of IP environment, whether it's streaming or social video or mobile or connected platforms. So and then you add in Oculus and 3D glasses and AR, all these other things coming. So I think it's a really, really fascinating time of change, and probably more rapid, both technological and business model change in this industry than we've had for 20 or 30 years. So I think the next decade will be fascinating.
Oh, 100%. I think eventually what we will do is go through all these podcasts and boil it down to whatever everyone has said as their one word. And I think change, innovation, they crop up quite often. I really think that sums up the industry that we're in, and we're almost at a constant point of change, aren't we? Which makes it really exciting. It makes it exciting to wake up every morning and check the news and things like that, and have a look through social media and just see what everyone's talking about in this industry, what new trend is next, what new technologies up and coming and things like that. And it all has a massive, massive impact on everyday consumers, doesn't it? And audiences around the world. So it's a truly unique industry we're in, Gareth, I think. And then obviously, Gareth, thank you so much for joining us today and helping me out with some of those questions. I found that really insightful. What are some of the kind of exciting plans or projects that Gravio has got in the pipeline, if you can tell us today?
Sure, happy to. And I think we touched on it in the discussion earlier that we're really excited about the opportunity around live production. We think that there is going to be many more people who want the tools and the access to create really professional quality live production events, shows in the cloud, and that they want the ability to do it flexibly, to do it remotely, to have access to the same quality of tools that you may have in a traditional sort of controllable production environment, be able to do that in a really collaborative, distributed way. So that's our big focus. We look at what we're rolling out. It's increasing the video fidelity through our platform, building out the tools to support remote and distributed teams in a more effective way, looking at the way that we can integrate more third-party tools for graphics or access to the third-party platforms, and then extending just the scope of our existing sort of production and control environments. There's lots of work to do but you're going to see, you'll see over the course of the next 3, 4, 6, 9 months is just a constant stream of updates. So we're really dedicated. We're growing our team. We're investing in engineering to take advantage of what we think is an amazing opportunity as we see this transition of services, people and technology to a more distributed cloud environment.
Yeah, you guys really aren't the kind of company that will ever sit still, are you? It's it's got to be constant updates, and I think that's what's needed in this industry, isn't it? To keep on going with what your consumers expect, what broadcasters expect, which is fantastic stuff. And then how can people get in touch with Gravio if they want to inquire about anything or find out more about what you're up to?
Best way to get into contact with us is just go to the website gravio.com, or we're hello@gravio.com if you want to email us. You can also follow updates on Twitter and LinkedIn, and they're probably the core platforms from a social perspective. But we've just updated our website. There's all of the new product updates are on there, and our team would be happy to talk to anyone who wants to find out more.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And what we'll do, Gareth, we'll link to your website in the podcast description as well. So anyone on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you guys can head there and find out more about Gravio there. So again, thank you so much, Gareth. Really do appreciate it for coming on and educating me about a few of these topics. Really do appreciate it. Thank you, mate.
Thanks. Great to talk to you.
Cheers, Gareth.